I'm really thrilled to be here and thank you for that lovely introduction. I feel the same about you and your organization. Um, so I started as a photographer and I've gone on to become a communication strategist, thinking of different ways for us to tell important stories. And I'm just thrilled. We've kind of had a chance to talk a little beforehand, but I want to introduce you to the panelists today. Tracy Campbell is the Vice President of Digital Content and Strategy at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, which we saw in the film. In this capacity, she oversees the organization's social media, email marketing, website editorial direction, and really to showcase all these powerful stories of the September 11th attacks, its victims, its heroes, and its legacy. Tracy began her career as a community journalist, working as a reporter and editor, then brought that passion for writing and storytelling to a breadth of other editorial focused roles at leading New York institutions. So, and we're in good storytelling hands with Tracy. Then we have Luke McCain and Ryan Knight. They're an award-winning director duo based in Southern California. Padres fans. Together, they own and operate Pure Cinema, a commercial production company rooted in storytelling in the commercial and the documentary spaces. And they travel the globe, producing content for brands like Netflix, Google, NFL, Microsoft, and many more. And they'll tell us more about their connection to the project a little bit later. And finally, we have Brian Belke with quite a resume. So he's a program analyst with casualty, mortuary affairs, and military funeral honors with the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Military Community and Family Policy. He joined this team in October of 2022. Prior to that, it's such an impressive bio. I mean, I really, prior to that, he worked as Chief U.S. Coast Guard Casualty Matters in the Coast Guard Personnel Service Center in Washington, D.C. He oversaw the Coast Guard's long-term support of the surviving family members of Coast Guard casualties, including the stand-up of the Coast Guard Gold Star and Surviving Family Member Program. There's much more, which I hope he'll get to tell us about as we go through our questions today. So I'm just thrilled to meet you all. And I had sent out my questions in advance, and I decided to change my final question to make it my first question, and I hope that's okay with you. The first question is, do you remember the first story you were told or that you heard or saw that had an impact on you personally? Tracy, you want to kick us off?
No pressure. I think the first story I remember is about the Holocaust. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors, and how some of the survivors found each other after they were liberated. One in particular was my cousin Heidi, who we just lost a couple months ago, who was on a train fresh out of the displaced persons camp. And something told her to get off the train in Bratislava, like for no apparent reason. And she got off the train and she ran into some other survivors, and they said, your mother and your other siblings are over there. And that was how they reconnected. So pretty powerful.
Wow. Tough act to follow.
That's a really tough act to follow. I read the question. I couldn't really remember my first one because I've been such a film buff and story since I was born. I think I was born in the movie theater. And so, but I can tell you the one that had the biggest resonance on my life was probably, it's a film called Interstellar by Christopher Nolan. Everyone's seen it, but there was a father-daughter relationship in that film that like awoken something within me. It was like, I didn't feel the need for children until then. And all of a sudden I could left that theater. I called my wife. I'm like, let's do it. She'd wanted it for years. So we had our first son a year later, named him Nolan after Christopher Nolan. And so that was probably the most, resonant story for me.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm really glad I started with the last question. Next.
Hello. Okay, great. This was the one question that like Ryan and I were talking about on the way here, that I couldn't really remember the first story. I was really wrapping my head around, stories I was told as a kid. And then I think just the most honest answer would be a movie that I saw probably shortly after my dad passed. My dad passed away from cancer when I was 16. And then I saw a movie called My Life I want to say, with Michael Keaton and Nicole Kidman, about a dad who's passing away before their baby is born. And he has to like record all the life moments on a video camera for his son to watch when he grows up, since he won't be here. And I just remember watching that as like a teenager, bawling my eyes out, like thinking like, this is an adult movie. Why is it having such an impact on me?
Mm.
And I think that was like the first time I was like, oh wow, like film really has a powerful impact on me. And because of loss, I think I was old enough to put two and two together and realize like my dad had just passed, and clearly this movie is like hitting me right at it.
Thanks.
Oh, I think the first one professionally, and she said more to the bio. Prior to doing all this, I was a pilot in the Navy flying P3 Maritime Patrol, and you never know where you're going to end up. Never know what the future holds, and no idea I'd end up working casualty assistance.
Yes.
That's coming up on 20 years now. But before I even knew I'd end up in this, I was in VP5, the Mad Foxes out of Jacksonville, Florida. A bunch of us department heads were having lunch at the golf course one day, all in our flight suits, and we had a bunch of older ladies come up to us, recognize the squadron patch, and they told us the story. They were survivors of a crash in Antarctica from a VP5 aircraft, George 5, back in the 70s, and just wanted to know if we knew the story, which we didn't. Did not know I'd go on to actually work these cases. I worked that case as part of, I worked Navy casualty, but just the impact it still had on them. And the bigger part, you can look on the website, that aircraft is still in Antarctica and the bodies have never been brought back home. Wow. So that is the impact too, that I said, touched me then, not even knowing this was the career field I'd eventually end up.
Thank you. I'm really glad I started with the last question first, because I think it demonstrates the power of story in terms of connecting us to other people, to ourselves. And maybe at the break, we can all share a memorable story that we first heard with each other. So thank you for that. And so moving on with our theme of storytelling, kind of what does it mean to you personally? We got a little glimpse of that from each of you, and professionally, the idea of how do you see the art of storytelling or the craft of storytelling creating change, particularly in the context we're discussing today, grief, resilience, community. So a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. I think, as you said, storytelling connects us, not just to each other, but to the history of the world, the zeitgeist of what's going on at the time. And, if you work for a mission-driven organization, it's goals and purpose. And I think it's interesting that really anything that we communicate is a story, even if it's a little quick text to your friend or your mom or your boyfriend, that's a story, and that's a way of connecting. I think overall, I think of it as the packaging that we use to communicate what's meaningful. And I think the way that it inspires change is by moving people, basically. Working at the 9/11 Museum, it's very easy to throw out statistics. 3,000 people were killed, and that's a very powerful statistic. But when you break it down and you tell the stories of the individuals who died and what their background was and who they left behind, that makes it personal. And that's what strikes a nerve more than a number or a piece of data.
Thank you.
I would say for me, storytelling is a way that we can all connect in a way that you just can't these days. Like, I work from home, right? And I have my own experiences. I have my own griefs. I have my own traumas that I go through. And I might feel like it's just me because I don't see other people going through that. But if I go watch a film, or I go hear a song, or I go read a poem, whatever that medium is, I can connect with someone else and realize, oh wait, I'm not alone in this. I can hear their story and see myself in their story. I can see how it ended up for them. There's hope at the end of whatever this dark thing going through is. So I think stories are a great way to obviously communicate ideas, but communicate emotions that maybe you don't know how to, and you express it through that story.
And yours is through film primarily.
Primarily, I think we're starting to venture into other mediums, but right now it's film. Yeah.
Luke?
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I would say storytelling for me is about giving a voice to people. I mean, Sierra was able to tell her story, but I think that there are so many other people out there who are unable to create a film or, a really awesome way of showcasing their story and their narrative. And as a filmmaker, I really love using our medium to give people a voice and kind of hold the mirror up to themselves and allow them to tell their story. I think it is incredibly therapeutic.
Yes. Brian, I just specifically for you wanted to ask, in your experience with military and casualty affairs, how has storytelling played a part in honoring the legacy?
And this is perfect. This is a great question because such a different background. Great
Yeah.
to hear these others. And yes, Sierra's film, amazing. But yeah, I come from a way different background, and my day-to-day work, talking with Catherine where we would fit into this. I mean, my day-to-day work is policy. I get to write instructions and answer Congress. Yeah, that does not touch storytelling. But in the outreaches and in the background, I said I've been doing the casualty assistance for about 20 years, working in Navy casualty, working with the Navy CACO programs, running the Coast Guard programs. And so day to day is doing paperwork, but when I get a chance to meet the families, that's the most rewarding. We can never replace what they've lost. That is the hard part of this job, is we can never make you whole again. But everybody wants their loved one to be remembered. And that's the biggest thing I've taken away from when I do get a chance to meet families, when I do outreaches like these. And it's, it doesn't fit the normal job description for a DOD or a, government employee in DC, but they all want to tell their story, remember their loved one, the good and the bad. And it's hard. That doesn't fit policy. It's great to work with nonprofits, and even the little part we do, it's a small part. We have the Military and Lasting Tribute, which we've heard a lot of feedback from. It's a digital memorial DOD hosts for all service members who've died since 1985. That's more just that we can check records back that far. But it's really simple, but just knowing that they can bring up a picture of their loved one and just the short that they served. We've heard it enough from families. They don't ever want to be forgotten. And that's the hard one. How do you put that into policy? How do you remember that? And always looking for answers. So it's great to be part of this and meet others that can bring things. I said that film was just amazing, and wish more could have a voice like that.
Thank you. And I love that phrase. We should have that over your desk, like policy. Your loved one will not be forgotten. That is the policy. That is beautiful. Thank you. So kind of jumping off on that, can you describe sort of how your current work, how you have used storytelling in the context of grief, resilience, supporting the community, and why is that choice, although we've touched upon this, why the choice of story versus data or image, or how have you used that in your work?
I think one of the best ways that the 9/11 Memorial and Museum does it is through the annual digital learning experience. And we have some alumni in the audience, but that's a short film that we put together every year that features different firsthand perspectives, first responders, survivors, family members. And I think it's directed at kids and students and teachers. And I think it just makes such a difference when they hear the stories firsthand versus hearing general terms. And, we can say first responders, firefighters, NYPD, but once they see the faces and they see the emotion, it just impacts them completely differently. And they process something that they couldn't process without that. So I think that's just one example of.
And you get to see that firsthand.
Exactly. And it's interspersed with footage of the day and of those people on the day. And it just really adds a dimension that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Luke and I are going to have pretty much the same answer on this one, but we're currently working on a documentary called Unbroken Echoes. It's following so far 3 people and how their lives were affected by 9/11. There was his son where the father died in a tower, a mother where her daughter died on United 93, and the FAA investigator that was first on site to the crash site of United 93. And it's about their initial story of that day, but it's really following them for the next 20 some odd years afterwards, and how it's changed them, how it took them to dark places, how they found hope since then, how they found repair in their lives, what good has come of their lives since then. And so this is just our start of this process, though. And so I think we're looking to find more and more people to tell more and more stories like this.
And Luke, maybe for you, what was the impetus? What drew you to that story?
Yeah, I mean, I've always just been so captured by 9/11, to be honest with you. I was just a high school kid from San Diego, but that day just had such a incredible impact on me personally. And so I grew up just always.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know.
Huh.
To be honest with you, I
Yeah.
really don't know. I majored in journalism, and I think I mean, I would literally watch every year just raw footage news coverage of the entire day
Wow.
and just like the impact that it had. And then I honestly I can't answer that question, but I did know that when I got to a certain point in my career, I kind of stepped back and thought to myself, what is the project that I would do for free? Like, what is the project that I just want to spend my time on? And I thought to myself, like, telling this story or these stories from 9/11 would just mean so much to me. And it would really, like, I would put my entire heart and soul into it. So I said, let me just go for it. And who knows, maybe I won't get any responses back, but I started reaching out to people, started sending emails. Tuesday's Children was one organization that I reached out to. Now I'm sitting here. And yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know why, but it has been and is the most important work of my entire career. I'm just so grateful to be able to, like I said, give a voice to these people. And like Ryan said, we want to continue telling these stories. From my perspective, there are so many documentaries about the day and like what happened, how the from basically sun up to sundown, but there's not many stories about the 20 plus years afterwards, like Sierra's story, right? Like how did that day impact so many people on a greater level, well beyond just the victims as well. I mean, it's a spider web. It's gone to so many people. And so it's just telling those stories. And I think never forgetting, it feels like we kind of are forgetting. There's less news coverage every single year. And I want to be someone that's keeping those stories front and center.
Thank you. And that's it's so important that there's the event, but then there are all the years after the event. And that's what your work is all of you, the work is so important. So thank you for that. Are you still looking for people?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
We have the 3 stories that we've shot and we're editing, kind of like a proof of concept. They're little short films or micro documentaries by themselves. But I think the goal is for us to use it as a proof of concept to gain funding and more stories, more relationships with people so we can tell a greater story, turn it into a long form series of some kind.
Wonderful. And
No, I think I love hearing the answers too. And some of this is said it's so hard when day to day is policy and government is driven by numbers. But yeah, numbers don't have the emotion and the stories I've collected, the families I've gotten to know and love through doing this. It brings meaning to it, but the bigger part, it helps us find where we're lacking in support, where we can do better. And some of these is so much of for those who've worked with the military casualty program, so much of it is the immediate, all the benefits that are paid, the immediate help. And that's been something we overlooked for years. And it was actually survivors who brought us to our attention is, 10 years down the road, well, what is there for me? What is still going on? And that's a big part where, my bio mentioned the standing up the Coast Guard long-term support program. And hey, I'm a Navy guy. I always got to put down the Army, but the Army led in recognizing that we were forgetting the survivors, that a big part of that, and it is the stories that we hear and that the wanting to always remember their loved one, that now we all have long-term support programs, different levels, and it's something that has not been really congressionally mandated. We did it out of our own people, out of our own budget. It gets shaky sometimes on that, but it is the families, even if it is simple as being invited to an event on the closest base or post to be remembered, have a chance to talk, and all the services sort of growing that organically. Again, it's that following the Army lead. I'll give them credit for that. And they've got the survivor outreach services. Navy has the Navy Gold Star program. So I was Navy moved over to Coast Guard, so copied them. We had the Coast Guard Gold Star. Air Force has the Air Force Families Forever, and Marines have the Marine Corps for Life. And it's all growing to sort of to be that touch point to, as we find ways to stay engaged with them. And there's no concrete benefit or entitlement tied to it, but it means so much to the family we've met and been able to stay in touch with.
thank you. And it wouldn't be 2024 without mentioning changing media landscape. And I often say, the Kardashians did not invent the selfie. And I usually show a slide of the self-portraits by Rembrandt, Vincent van Gogh, and Frida Kahlo, and cave paintings to show that this impulse that we have as humans to want to show the world who we are and a deeper sense of ourselves is not new. So having said that, in the changing media landscape, I wonder, are there specific ways your approach to storytelling has changed, evolved, new strategies, new platforms? Although, just knowing you all a little bit, you're so hardcore story that you would bring it to every platform. But for our audience, I wonder if you have any sort of insight or thoughts on that could be helpful.
I don't think it's a big shock that I would say social media has just completely blown up the way storytellers do their jobs. And in fact, as a Gen Xer, when I started out and would tell people I wanted to be a writer, everyone was like, good luck with that. And now storytelling is a legitimate thing. And we're all at a conference talking about it. And it's a legitimate career. So social media, for good and bad, gives everybody a platform to tell stories. That has its downsides, but it also has its good sides because you can reach a lot more people and everyone. Storytelling is much more accessible for the general average person. All they need is a cell phone and an account with Instagram or TikTok. So I see both sides of it, and but obviously as a writer, it affects the way you tell a story. It's kind of affected the way you write, the structure of a story.
How so?
Well, everything has to be quick and eye-catching and short. The attention span is much shorter. Sometimes you have to sort of reorder things and put the meat of the story at the very top because people will lose interest otherwise, and that sort of goes against everything you're taught as a journalist.
Right.
So it's just amazing to see how it's evolved and how it has affected language and culture and writing and our perception of media. So it's fascinating and horrifying at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything. To piggyback off of that, I think my biggest thing I've learned is that yes, for social media, you do have to restructure things, but you almost use that as a tool to get them to the main story. So it's a 10-second clip that we're going to make. It has to be quick and grab their attention, but you're doing that to get the click. Take them to the website where the actual story is. If we have a 5-minute video, we want someone to watch. They're not going to watch it on Instagram, but if they care enough about it, it gets to the website. All of a sudden, they can buy in. So you just get them to buy into your idea quickly. They'll stick around for as long as you want them to. And I think at the end of the day, storytelling still is all about connecting with someone emotionally. If you can get someone to buy into what you're talking about, if they can connect to you in any way, then they're just going to buy in and they'll come and watch your story.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really add much more than what they just said. What Ryan said is spot on. What Tracy said about meeting people where they're at. Everyone's on social media now. Just telling those short form stories, I think, are becoming more and more important. Yeah, I think storytelling is in everything we do, whether it's a 6-second literal commercial spot or a long form narrative, feature film, short film, whatever it may be. So it's just meeting people where they're at and continuing to tell stories in any way, shape, or form.
You know what you all reminded me of, that click. I was just thinking once upon a time, and that's sort of how how stories begin. And that's the click to get you to the rest of it. So thank you for that. Brian?
I think it's harder. We're not in the job of storytelling for the undersecretary, but
yes,
it's the outreach we provide, the change. The Military and Lasting Tribute, I think, is only coming up on 5 years old, but we would not have even had that resource before to allow families to remember their loved one. Way different than we're also involved with the Vietnam Memorial, Korean Memorial, verifying names on that. That's a whole nother process and enough stories there, but it is, they already said meeting people where they're at. The digital platform allows that. We really don't directly work social media. We have some more outreach, but that's the bigger part we see out of that is the change in the digital media. Is it allows us to meet the survivors, the loved ones, where they're at, and hopefully provide support to them.
Thank you. So in view of that and sort of the changing landscape, I was wondering, are there ways of storytelling that you'd like to return to? I'm thinking of things like the Moth, live story events where we all gather in person, or are there things you want to invent? I mean, are there things you're thinking, oh, if only we could do that?
I think as a writer, I sort of miss the power of blogs because that gave you sort of a less blingy way to craft a more finely wrought story. And it's, it's not as eye-catching and it's kind of a joke now, but I do miss the power of pure words a little bit.
I'm kind of torn into two different paths that are completely different. I love theater. I love the idea of going and having a live performance and everyone leaving afterwards, having that community and able to talk about it and go grab coffee. Let's discuss what we just went through. And that's still a thing. But I think another way to do that in this growing digital age, I toyed with VR for a little bit. And I got the Apple Vision Pro for a little bit. And I went to those immersive films that you can do. And now you can bring in people through the FaceTime or whatever. But it's a way to have such an immersive film. Like I imagine, like they all have right now is like documentaries, but imagine a drama where you're in the perspective of the protagonist and you hear the voice coming almost from you, and you're looking at the other character. How engaging is that to be?
It's like a novel.
Exactly. Yeah, you could live a first person film. You're actually staring around looking at everything. So we can somehow do that. But then how do we bring the social aspect into that? How do I talk to somebody where I feel like I'm with them across the world, where these VR goggles kind of get you there? So it's a way to bring that community aspect into a digital realm, I think, which would be a fun place to go explore.
For me as a filmmaker, my life is moving images. But I think what I've really been enjoying getting into in the last few years is more still photography storytelling. I think that, one image telling a very, very deep and broad story is extremely powerful. And so that for me is just something that everyone has in their pocket. It's so easy to tell a story just within an image or a series of images. And it's so simple as well. It's almost like a regression in a way. But I think that for me, it's very, very impactful to kind of harness that and hone that as a way to kind of get better in my own filmmaking.
I think, again, it's take great ideas from others, working with so many nonprofits and things. We've got a nonprofit that's sort of brand new, and I did not write the name down. I'll have to look it up. But the idea of storytelling from others for the family of the loved one, especially for the military, a lot of young children that have maybe one memory of their parent, don't know the stories, collecting the stories from people who knew that person and putting them in whatever format, a book or a short film or audio for the children, and even the spouses or parents, that they can go back and hear stories about their service member from those who served with them. That they'll never get a chance to hear those anecdotes from their loved one. And it is, especially as time goes. I think as we're talking and we talk that, it's 23 years since 9/11, and I've got an 18 and 16-year-old, and it did all impact us different. But, they only know from the stories I tell, and especially as they hit, young adulthood now, they've heard the stories growing up, but they don't remember them unless you retell them. That's, and especially as we have the 9/11 anniversaries, they both said, hey, the teacher in class asked, what were your parents doing? And my 16-year-old even said, I couldn't remember exactly. I know you were on a boat, but so it is collecting those stories. And that makes me think, when we have an opportunity to this, how do we collect those for those that have passed?
Yes, thank you. And we sort of touched upon this, but you may have more specific examples of being able to see the power of a story you've told on an individual, particularly in their moment of grief or resilience or building community. I'm wondering if you have a personal experience or professional experience where you've seen that. I know you alluded to that with the Day of Learning. And I'm wondering if you could share with the audience any specifics where you said, oh, I see that impacted that person in this way.
Yeah, I mean, the first example that comes to mind, I can't take full credit for, but if you've been to the museum, there is an audio recording of a man named Brian Sweeney on one of the planes. And you can hear a recording of a message that he left his wife, basically saying, I know I'm not going to make it, but I love you. And I want you to go on with your life and be happy. And I mean, it's hard to even tell the story without getting a little choked up, but every single person stops there and you just see the raw emotion, and it's just incredible. I mean, amazing that he had the wherewithal to leave that message, and then really captures the horror of what was going on. And it's just, there's an instant reaction from everybody who sees it, unless you're a sociopath of some kind.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's the example that stands out to me.
Yes.
Mine actually comes from, I wrote a college short story when I was like my freshman year of college in Santa Barbara, and it was about the day my dad had a heart attack. And it was my first time ever writing kind of like a narrative short story. And so I just kept writing, it's like 20 pages. And then the professor let me actually read it in front of the class because she liked it so much. And then just getting to express that emotion out in public for the first time, which I'd never done before. And then getting to see the reaction of people's faces, then having people come up after class and tell me, hey, my dad had the same experience. Getting to connect with people like that.
Yes.
I think that was the first time I saw something that I created actually have an emotional impact on other people.
Yeah. Lou?
Yeah, we've done a couple short form documentaries in the past few years for 4 brands. We did one about a Lululemon ambassador who lost his mother. And when he lost her, he really felt abandoned and lost and didn't have any community. And just making that film and watching him watch that, again, I think it's just about giving people a voice and seeing their story represented in moving images. I think it's very therapeutic, and it just, that I think was one of the moments where I said, oh, wow, like these are stories we should be telling more. Stories like this is what I really want to be doing with my time.
Brian?
I think a lot of the programs, I said, it's programs that I'm blessed to be a part of have come a lot from stories. I've worked with one mother, and I see this in a lot of the families, what can they take out of their loved one's death? What can it mean? And tied to all different circumstances of loss. I think some of our speakers this afternoon, and Sierra said, perfect, we've evolved, therapy is more common, but it's sometimes hard. Loss by suicide, that's a hard one to talk to. We want to remember the loved ones. We want to remember the good points. We don't want to remember the lows. And the families want to talk, but that's not something they want to necessarily storytell. Loss by overdose, accidental, and some of those, we never know the true story. But hearing those family members and the pain they still carry, but yet that we can listen, we can be there, and we can hear what they want, and crafting the programs, having a space to get together, to talk, to share, and knowing you're in a safe space. That's some of the biggest of the storytelling.
Thank you. And I think finally, before we get to questions, if participants want to incorporate some of these principles in their own work, do you have any kind of suggestions or places to start, or what would be a first step?
I think pinpointing the story is that you want to tell is the first step. And to do that, I think it's just think about whatever has stuck with you, whatever people you've encountered during your day, whatever story is haunting you is probably a story that other people want to hear. And you should pick up your phone and pick up TikTok or Instagram. It's very easy. You will find people will listen very quickly, and that will sort of inspire you to keep going. And just speak naturally like you would speak to a friend or your roommate, and make it your own.
Mine would probably be, whatever you do, don't fake it. Go at it with everything that's in your heart. Believe what you're talking about, because if you don't, it's going to show up on camera or on a page or whatever it is. If you don't know what you're talking about and you want to start, it's not going to work out well for you. Like for what we do, if we're directing a film and we don't care enough, if our heart wasn't in this story, if we haven't done our research, and we can't pass that passion on down the line of all of our crew members, it's just going to get distilled, and it's just going to be a less than stellar story. And that's not what we set out to do.
Right.
Yeah, like Tracy and Ryan said, find the story that speaks to you, be authentic. And then I would say, just do it. Don't overthink it. Don't, worry about the ways in which you're going to tell it. Is it going to be good enough? Is it going to be high quality enough? Just go do it. I think, one of the most impactful documentary filmmakers out there right now, his name's Mark Leda, and he has a platform on YouTube called Soft White Underbelly. And he films people down on Skid Row with a camera. He just sets up in a studio with a backdrop, He just presses record and they tell their story. He doesn't overthink it. He just prompts them with simple questions. It's one take stories, and they are incredibly, incredibly moving and impactful. And that's someone who's not overthinking it. They're going out, they're being authentic, and they're just telling stories. So I would say just do it. Don't overthink it.
Oh, hard to, yeah, and said directly not in my line of work to do the storytelling, but I think the biggest is there's so many others out there who want to hear it to help that, do tell your story, do reach out. And, even in my role bound by policy and law, the biggest thing I can do day to day too is coordinate, is get people in touch with others like this that can help, that are there to listen, and just knowing that that's there.
Thank you. Several of you have answered this before, but if you haven't, is there a story you most want to tell that you haven't told yet? Tracy?
I think, one thing that always fascinated me, which the film touches on a little bit, is the fact that people who lost loved ones on September 11th were privately mourning their own loved ones, but while the world was grieving this horrible event. So it was almost two separate events. And I mean, I can't even imagine what kind of layer that adds to mourning and grief. So I've always wanted to explore that a little more.
Okay.
Working on Unbroken Echoes with Luke has really shown me that I want to tell stories that can bring hope to the hopeless. I'm personally a Christian, and I think that there's so many stories where God has impacted people and seen just such transformation from darkness to light. And I don't think those stories get told a lot because, you don't talk about politics or religion in the world. It's taboo. And so to be courageous enough to go tell those and put those out on my platforms, I think that'd be a cool one for me.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, Unbroken Echoes is the documentary project that we're working on right now. And the project that we want to do is a larger version of that, right? We want to tell more of these stories, a larger scale project that can, again, just give a voice to more people.
Oh, that's I wish we had the means to tell everyone's story. It's, every family I talk to, every family I meet is another one. I add to my memory, but they're all out there. And I'll steal from my Coast Guard cohorts that, everybody that's been part of the service made us what we are today. How great or small their contribution, Coast Guard uses, they're part of the long blue line. Other services have something similar, but that's everybody, whether they were a first term seaman recruit or a commander, has contributed to where we arrive as a country and as a service. And I wish we had a chance to tell everyone's story. And that's the ones that others do get to tell are so amazing. And there's something in everybody that's worth telling.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think about a little bit, Ryan, what you said, tying the, and God said, let there be light, tying back to the film with the tattoos she described of 88 and sunny. That's going to stay with me, 88 and sunny. So thank you. I think we have a little time for questions, if anyone has questions. Oh.
This was great. Really appreciate everyone. It's been interesting because in the last year I've picked up film production in some extent, as I've been trying to tell stories professionally and personally, a lot of it around social impact in 9/11. And it's been interesting as there's obviously so many emotions going into this, especially as you are, a stakeholder directly affected. And my question, because I feel like you guys touched on a lot of it, is we're looking for a call to action a lot of the time. We're talking about something very serious. We're telling a story that's serious, but we don't want to be too serious, right? Can't make people feel uncomfortable. They don't like that. Message gets lost. They stop listening. And so it's something I've been working on because, yeah, I'm a little angry, I'm sad, but I'm good. but I want people to understand what I'm feeling. Even more so, I've had the chance because of this organization to get to know some young men and women that lost their dad at 9/11 that are much younger than me, like Sierra. Some weren't even born yet. And that's what's kind of reignited my enthusiasm about this mission, because I realized, I was 18 years old. They don't have anyone to talk to. People don't want to talk about it. It's a topic that they don't get to address often, and it's from the stories of their own experience. It's from people telling them stories about who their dad was or their mom. And like, it's amazing. I mean, I'm 18 years old. I'm in the same industry as my dad was. And I haven't heard many stories. Like, there's so much I'd love to know about my father. And so I'm going into a little bit of a rant as I do. But how do we get our messaging across, touch the hearts, pull the strings, let them know the severity of what we're trying to say, and do it in a length of time and in a manner that it's received and accepted. And call to action can be many things. I like that example of the blue line. Thank you all.
I think the most important thing is that people tell their stories and that they do it in an authentic way. And whether they have a sense of humor about it or they're really emotional and angry, I don't think it matters. I think the rawness is what will move people to any call to action. And I think the call to action can be, just varies from situation to situation. That could be supporting the 9/11 Memorial Museum. It could be getting involved in your community. It could be helping to refurbish a memorial in your local town. It could be working with survivors, psychology, therapy. I think there's a billion options, and it's just a matter of exposing people, of getting people who went through it to speak freely and honestly about what they went through.
Yeah, I mean, spot on. My gut reaction to when you said, do it in a way that people won't get, screw that. Have courage, say exactly the story as it is. Be raw, be authentic. People are tired of safe. Tell them exactly how it is now.
I know what you mean though, because I feel like I've struggled with that in my work as well, like wanting to be everything for everyone. And I think once you just decide to be authentic to yourself and tell your stories, and it doesn't have to be for everyone, it will resonate with the people who would need it most.
And really nothing to add. I said, don't create the stories. It's more being there to listen. But I think the biggest part I've seen is, if you feel unheard, it's finding others, finding a safe space, finding the groups that they're out there. I mean, no, from what I've seen, truly nobody's alone. There are others out there. We have to find them, or they have to make the outreach.
It's a tough situation, right? Because it's like we're asking to never forget, but we're not even sure what that means sometimes, right? And then all these call to action, and there's different ways to do it. And so there's no one answer, right answer, easy answer, but very much appreciate your perspectives. Thank you.
For the filmmakers, it's hard to get a project picked up. So how much do you think about where you want the project to go, and how much does that affect your decision making on how to tell the story, especially now as you're at the beginning of the process trying to put the sizzle reel together of what you're doing and where you would like it to go?
I mean, it's a great question, and we probably don't think about that enough. We're just kind of in creation mode right now, which is let's just make the best story or series of stories that we can and trust that it will find a home when we complete it. But I do think there is value in kind of working backwards and saying, I think we have a goal. This is going to be pitched to this outlet. Let's, study that. What types of stories are they accepting? What formats and how are they doing it? And kind of create that formula in our story, which we are not doing. Right now, like I said, I think we're just trying to tell the most important stories the most impactful way. Ryan, you want to pick it back?
Yeah, I think we're in a unique situation too, whereas I think a lot of filmmakers like they're just going and making their film, and that's what's taking up their time. We own a production company too, so our paychecks are covered already. So we're doing this purely out of passion. So it's not essentially to make money; it's just because we think it's important.
That's also a challenge though, because it doesn't allow us tons of time to work on projects like this all day, every day, which is why I think the goal for us is to get funding of some kind so we can not have to worry about, we can work on a project like this nonstop for weeks or months or whatever it may be to actually do it right, rather than just finding little pockets of time to actually work on it.
I want to echo a couple things that were said in terms of meeting people where they are. My question as a staff member at Tuesday's Children is about trust. I don't think it's any surprise to you that we are very protective of those that we serve. And each of you have come to us with your own passion and your own ability to meet people where they are. I'm wondering, and I can tell you you've done it, but could you put voice to how you build trust when you're telling someone else's story?
I think you have to make yourself a little vulnerable also. And not to keep saying the word authenticity, but I think that's really key. I think if you are yourself, people know that you're a real person and that you are an empathetic person, they will open up to you, and you will, you try to find some common ground and something that's relatable and let them know that it's a safe space. And I think that's probably the best way to get through life in general.
Going back to where I said, don't fake it. I think it comes down to when you genuinely care, and then you genuinely care about the people that are in that story, that comes across. That's been my experience, at least. I'm a guy who wears my heart on my shoulder. So when I care, you're going to see it. And I think that's built a lot of trust with people pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it's just being a good person. You know what I mean? Like communicating that up front and answering any questions about reservations or fears that someone might have about telling their story, and letting them know it's a safe space, like Tracy said, and just making them feel as comfortable as possible, assuring them that they will see the film before it premieres, and letting them know before we're interviewing them that if there's any questions they don't feel comfortable with, we can skip those. And again, just being a good person, just communicating to them that like, this is a safe space. We want to tell your story, but we're not going to press you. We want you to tell the story that's authentic to you. If you don't feel comfortable, just let us know.
I think, Annie, from a perspective of not really telling other stories, more collecting them, but being open. We already said meeting them where they're at, but setting expectations too, especially, hey, I said earlier, I'm bound by policy and law in what I do. I would love to do more. There's so much need out there, but setting those expectations, whether they're high or low, and then staying in communication, even if it's something not directly storytelling, but helping the family, we're waiting on this is where we are, but not forgetting them right there in the moment, staying in touch and setting those expectations.
Beautiful. Thank you. Those of us that are vessels, really thank you for wearing your heart on your sleeve. I get it. I have two questions coming to us from Zoom. The first is, do any of you know any platforms that are allowing those that have lost people to suicide? Anything to share specifically with that circumstance of loss?
Military specific TAPS is another nonprofit that does a lot of great work with suicide within the Department of Defense. And ours are our service member central specific, but a lot of the Defense Suicide Prevention Office, we partner with them. They're doing a lot of outreach for suicide survivors. And I've hit it. There's military1source.com or .mil. Military1source.mil is our military community family policy website. It is DoD run, supported. There's some assets on there that are specific to the military. You have to have a ID card, but a lot of it, we've got training courses. We've developed some with partnership from TAPS, with partnership from DISPO, suicide survivor courses, suicide. Even we've seen the effect and working with them. One suicide affects 75 other people is a number DISPO puts out. Those first responders, those care providers, we're all affected by it. And we need to step back and realize that and take care of ourselves too. So it's not a direct organization, but there is work being done on products like that. I said, for those affected by suicide, it's military, but it applies to anybody. There's a course, a middle life learning course after a suicide, and the emotions and the support that's out there for you.
Thank you. We will continue this dialogue absolutely offline too. And we will be sure to share Luke and Ryan's film trailer as well. Amanda, who is calling in from the car, she lost her father on 9/11, and she's writing a children's book. So from her words, she said, from talking to the 9/11 memorial team while working on my book, they talked to how there's a shift as how we're trying to teach and talk to children in the next generation. Something from never forget to always remember. Many of our educators in schools were too young to even have their own memories. I have parents reach out to me and ask, how do I talk to children and teach them? There's a delicate balance of talking about something that is personally connected and to the facts of it. So, with storytellers, what advice or experience do they have in dealing with the shift now that we are 24 years out?
Going from never forget to always remember. And I wonder if that might spark some thoughts, like what would be the difference in how you would start that story?
I think you have. Oh.
To say, maybe it's not coming from a place of tragedy, but a place of, these were loved ones and remembering the love that came from those people.
And that's an always remember. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what we do tend to focus on, is the heroics and sort of the everyday people who became heroes that day and just facing unimaginable circumstances you don't even know what you're capable of. And then I think just not being afraid to talk about it and speaking about it in an age appropriate manner, but not shying away from it and talking about the long-term impact that it had on the world and how we still feel the impact today.
And I had to scroll that down quick. That's great to always remember, and does spark how to use that. And I said, blessed by so many great programs I'm in. I've helped at Coast Guard and Navy bring back the now identified remains of World War II service members, and did one for the Coast Guard family in Buffalo. So that is great nieces and nephews that were 3 years old when the member died in the Philippines, and to finally bring them home, the always remember. I think they're a perfect example that it's even not. We still tell the service member's story, but it's look where the family is now 3 generations later. And not even that service member in particular did not have a family, was too young. But I said it's still the great nieces, and the touching part, it really was storytelling. The touching part of that family was it was a school project by, would be like great nephew that knew they had a World War II service member that was not home yet, and did the research for his school project, reached out to those government resources and found out, how do we start the identification? How do we bring them home? And to have him tell that story for the family, and then bigger it became for the whole Coast Guard, is that's a perfect example of always remember. It's as we get a generation removed, or we're talking coming up, we're already kicking around at the Pentagon how to tell the story of 25 years and hold the 9/11 remembrance. And it is a hard approach, as it's not the family members, it's not the spouse anymore who lost the service member or the employee in the building. It is now children, it is now nephews and nieces, because it's possible that that spouse or parent has already passed themselves. And how do we change the story? How does the story change? We're not changing it. It's changing just by time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thought it was worth addressing my fellow 9/11 family member. But I became a father 3 years ago, and I had my second 4 months ago. And that's just added so much perspective and layers. And then, my 3-year-old watching Unicorn Academy, one of the unicorns lost her father, and he was able to put it together. It was at that moment, like, you saw it, like 3 years old. He's looking at me and he's like, "Oh, wait, this is why your dad's an angel. Like, he's gone. You want to know why, and you can't see him again." And for me, always remembering for my son and my daughter when she's old enough to understand everything I'm saying, has been reminding him, "Oh, you're like this. That behavior was like your grandfather, good and bad." Like, I think there's value to not, that day does not define them. The heroic behavior does not define them. They were a lot more than that. They were a person, they were human, they were flawed. But they're amazing, and showing them the lessons I learned from my father and the things that I got and things that they're getting. That's how I always remember. I want to share that.
Annie, I hate to ask the moderator since no one's asked you a question, but just building on this always remember concept, is there any work that you or anybody else on the panel is aware of about in elementary schools rewriting books about the history of the United States? So it becomes an integral part of our story, of all of our stories, that then can be used as a platform for the individual stories that you're all talking about to build on top of. Because at the end of the day, are you smarter than a 5th grader, right? If we're not teaching this to those who weren't alive then, is there anybody that's aware of anything that's actually going on from an educational platform? And I'll ask you, Annie, to start. If you know, you don't. If you don't, you don't.
I do not, although certainly I know you did. A commendable activity, right? How do we get people engaged in our history and learning it and telling it and impacting the future through it? It's such a beautiful question. I do not know anyone who's doing that, but perhaps others.
There is a pretty big lobbying effort to try to get it into the state curriculum, especially in New York. And I believe it is part of the curriculum in certain parts of New Jersey. But I know that's a big and ongoing issue, and one that people on our staff are working to facilitate. There are a lot of great learning resources that teachers can use if they want to integrate it into the. Yeah. There's some, obviously ours are, we have them and they're available and they're top of the line, but yes, that's a tough situation, and it's definitely a big issue, but one that is being addressed.
I was just going to piggyback off all of that and just say, whether it's always remember and never forget, I don't think it necessarily matters. I think it's just important to keep telling the stories in any way, shape, or form that we can. And obviously make them, child appropriate, but introducing them young and just, again, giving a voice to these people. I think we will always remember or never forget if we keep telling the stories. That's important.